The sun had slipped behind the chain of low-slung warehouses, leaving the suburban highway washed in amber and the faint sodium haze of street lamps. It was the kind of late evening that made noise feel distant. A semi's sighing brakes somewhere far off, the thin hiss of tires over hot asphalt, a radio murmuring in the next lane. General Marcus Ellison guided his black SUV with the same deliberate calm he brought to briefings and battlefield maps. Hands at 10 and 2, signals tapped a beat early, a steady 52 and a 55. He was headed home from a regional defense symposium, tie loosened, jacket folded on the passenger seat beside a manila folder of notes. His keynote had been the usual. Leadership is a discipline, not a performance. Command is service long before it is authority. Red and blue lit up the rearview mirror. Marcus eased off the accelerator and blinked once, as if verifying the reflection was real. Siren chirp. He signaled, drifted to the shoulder, and coasted to an unhurried stop behind a guardrail casting a striped shadow over the shoulder. Streetlight glow fell across the hood like a pale hand. The cruiser door opened. Officer Daniel Kirkwood stepped out with the squared-shoulder swagger of someone who thought distance was power. One hand hovered on his holster. The other adjusted a duty belt ridden with hard angles. Radio, cuffs, baton. Even before he reached the window, his jaw was set, his eyes narrowed. Marcus lowered the glass, keeping both hands visible on the wheel. "License and registration," Kirkwood said, voice clipped, already impatient. "Good evening, officer," Marcus replied, tone even. "May I ask the reason for the stop?" "You failed to signal when you changed lanes," Kirkwood said, chin flicking toward the road as if the asphalt itself could testify. Marcus felt the faintest ripple of doubt. He was meticulous. He always signaled, habit baked in by decades of consequences for small mistakes. Still, he said nothing that turned the moment competitive. He reached slowly, right hand to wallet, and handed over his license, then the registration from the glove box. His movements were precisely paced, deliberate without being theatrical. Kirkwood studied the card longer than the information required, eyes moving between the plastic and the man. "Marcus Ellison," he read, drawing out the syllables like a dare. "Step out of the vehicle." Marcus looked up. "Is there a particular reason?" The officer's nostrils flared. "Don't question me." "Out." Now Marcus clicked his seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped onto the gritty shoulder. The warmth of the day still seeped from the asphalt. He stood tall, posture unthreatening, hands resting open by his sides. Up close, Kirkwood seemed smaller than his swagger. Compact, tightly coiled, looking for friction. "Tint looks dark," Kirkwood said, circling the SUV as if it might confess. "License plate frame's non-compliant. Moved across 2 lanes like you owned them." He came back around, eyes steady on Marcus as if scanning for a flinch. "What are you hiding?" "My windows are within legal limits," Marcus answered quietly. "If you run the registration, you'll see the inspections are current. I signaled each lane change, and I'm happy to wait while you review your dash cam." Kirkwood took a step closer, and the space between them felt suddenly charged. "You think you're clever." "I think we both want to get this right," Marcus said. Calm was not a technique for him. It was muscle memory. "Turn around," Kirkwood snapped. "Hands on the hood." "For what cause?" Marcus asked, still level. "Am I being detained?" "You're being told to comply." "You like to test limits?" Kirkwood's hand hovered half an inch closer to his holster. Marcus pivoted slowly and placed his palms on the warm metal. Kirkwood patted him down in jerky, punitive strokes, then gripped his wrists and ratcheted the cuffs with a click that felt louder than the passing traffic. "Officer," Marcus said, breath steady, "there's no need for restraints. I'm not resisting, and I'm willing to answer any questions." "You'll answer them in the car," Kirkwood said. "After you learn some respect." A pair of teenagers in a dented hatchback had pulled into the far lot of a shuttered tire shop. One leaned on the horn of his curiosity. The other lifted a phone. The bright rectangle hovered like a tiny moon. A delivery driver slowed as he passed, eyes widening, then rolled on. Video had a way of finding its own tide. Kirkwood steered Marcus toward the cruiser. Gravel shifted under dress shoes. The cuffs bit a little when he stepped down the small incline. "Watch your head," Kirkwood said without meaning it, guiding him into the back seat with a firm hand at the shoulder. Inside the cage of plexiglass and mesh, streetlight glare stuttered over Marcus's face as traffic poured by in streaks. He inhaled through his nose, slow and even, the breathing he'd taught lieutenants to use when radios screamed and maps bled red. Kirkwood slid into the driver's seat, tossed Marcus's license onto the dash, and spent a long, performative beat writing nothing in particular. "People like you," he muttered, not looking back, "think the rules don't apply." Marcus watched the night swim by in the slice of window he could see. He did not answer. He did not explain who he was, what those two quiet stars meant on days he wore a uniform. He had learned that explanations offered too early only stoked whatever a man like Kirkwood already wanted to be true. The siren chirped again, pointless flourish, and the cruiser pulled away from the shoulder. Behind them, the hatchback kids put their phones down, thumbs already moving, the world already watching without knowing it. Marcus let one thought rise and settle, cool and precise. This officer has no idea what he's just done. Marcus Ellison had never looked for trouble, but he had spent a lifetime preparing for it. His story didn't begin with medals or salutes. It began in a cramped apartment on the south side of Atlanta, where the hum of traffic outside the window was a lullaby and the rattle of his mother's alarm clock was the morning reveille. His mother, Gloria, worked 2 jobs, day shifts at a medical clinic and night shifts cleaning offices downtown. She told Marcus and his younger sister often, "Discipline is the one thing no one can take from you. If you master yourself, you can master your circumstances." Those words stitched themselves into the boy's conscience. By 17, Marcus had enlisted. While most of his friends chased quick paychecks or slipped into the shadows of the streets, he shaved his head, laced boots, and carried a duffel into Fort Benning. Basic training was hell for most. For Marcus, it was clarifying. Yelling, push-ups, marches in rain that felt like knives. He absorbed it all without complaint. Drill sergeants learned quickly he wasn't one to break. His career became a steady climb. First deployment overseas in his 20s. Desert heat. Dust choking every breath. The first time he had to write letters to families who would never again see their sons. He earned respect the way soldiers trust currency. Under pressure, in silence, with decisions that kept people alive. By 35, he was a lieutenant colonel, shaping entire battalions. By 48, 2 silver stars glinted on his shoulders, the mark of a major general. Yet at home, in his neighborhood, he was simply Mr. Ellison, the man who shoveled snow for Mrs. Harris 2 doors down, the neighbor who helped fix a broken fence when storms knocked it down, the father who spoke at high schools, telling restless teenagers that education and patience weren't just words, but survival skills. To his soldiers, he was Sir. To the Pentagon, he was a strategist. To the children on his street, he was the tall man who always waved. That was Marcus. Calm, steady, deliberate. The uniform amplified what was already inside him. It never defined him. Daniel Kirkwood's beginnings were different, though in a way no less ordinary. He grew up in the middle-class sprawl of suburban America. Cul-de-sacs, chain restaurants, Little League, and weekends at the strip mall. He wasn't a bad kid. But he wasn't disciplined either. School came and went without distinction. His teachers remembered him more for absences than achievements. After high school, jobs blurred. Stock boy at a grocery store, delivery driver, bouncer at a local bar. None lasted long. The police academy offered something different. A uniform, a badge, a title. For Kirkwood, it wasn't about service, it was about authority. He discovered early that authority could be stretched. He liked the way people's voices changed when they saw the badge. He liked the way compliance came with a barked command. In his first years, supervisors noted his eagerness, but also his temper. Complaints trickled in. Motorists claiming he'd pulled them over without cause. Citizens describing aggressive pat-downs. A disproportionate number of Black and Latino residents in his reports. Each time, the paperwork was reviewed, shrugged at, filed away. Complaints dissolved in bureaucracy. Kirkwood learned a dangerous lesson. The system shielded its own. With every escape, his arrogance grew. By the time he hit his late 30s, Kirkwood had cultivated a reputation, not for excellence, but for being hard-nosed. In precinct chatter, that meant a cop who didn't hesitate to escalate, who viewed every encounter as a contest he had to win. He wore his complaints like invisible stripes, proof that he was doing the job right. He wasn't unique. Every department had a Kirkwood, a man who confused intimidation with respect, compliance with justice. But on that night, under the sodium glare of a suburban street lamp, his path intersected with Marcus Ellison's. Two men from different worlds, one who built authority on humility and discipline, the other who clung to authority as armor for his insecurity. Their collision wasn't random. It was inevitable. And as Kirkwood steered his prisoner toward the station, bragging under his breath, and Marcus sat silent, with the poise of a man who had faced far worse, the stage was set for a confrontation that neither the precinct nor the Pentagon could ignore. Marcus Ellison had never looked for trouble, but he had spent a lifetime preparing for it. His story didn't begin with medals or salutes. It began in a cramped apartment on the south side of Atlanta, where the hum of traffic outside the window was a lullaby, and the rattle of his mother's alarm clock was the morning reveille. His mother, Gloria, worked 2 jobs, day shifts at a medical clinic and night shifts cleaning offices downtown. She told Marcus and his younger sister often, "Discipline is the one thing no one can take from you. If you master yourself, you can master your circumstances." Those words stitched themselves into the boy's conscience. By 17, Marcus had enlisted. While most of his friends chased quick paychecks or slipped into the shadows of the streets, he shaved his head, laced boots, and carried a duffel into Fort Benning. Basic training was hell for most. For Marcus, it was clarifying, yelling, push-ups, marches in rain that felt like knives. He absorbed it all without complaint. Drill sergeants learned quickly he wasn't one to break. His career became a steady climb. First deployment overseas in his 20s. Desert heat, dust choking every breath, the first time he had to write letters to families who would never again see their sons. He earned respect the way soldiers trust currency. Under pressure, in silence, with decisions that kept people alive. By 35, he was a lieutenant colonel, shaping entire battalions. By 48, 2 silver stars glinted on his shoulders, the mark of a major general. Yet at home, in his neighborhood, he was simply Mr. Ellison, the man who shoveled snow for Mrs. Harris 2 doors down, the neighbor who helped fix a broken fence when storms knocked it down, the father who spoke at high schools, telling restless teenagers that education and patience weren't just words but survival skills. To his soldiers, he was Sir. To the Pentagon, he was a strategist. To the children on his street, he was the tall man who always waved. That was Marcus, calm, steady, deliberate. The uniform amplified what was already inside him. It never defined him. Daniel Kirkwood's beginnings were different, though in a way no less ordinary. He grew up in the middle-class sprawl of suburban America, cul-de-sacs, chain restaurants, Little League, and weekends at the strip mall. He wasn't a bad kid, but he wasn't disciplined either. School came and went without distinction. His teachers remembered him more for absences than achievements. After high school, jobs blurred. Stock boy at a grocery store, delivery driver, bouncer at a local bar. None lasted long. The police academy offered something different, a uniform, a badge, a title. For Kirkwood, it wasn't about service, it was about authority. He discovered early that authority could be stretched. He liked the way people's voices changed when they saw the badge. He liked the way compliance came with a barked command. In his first years, supervisors noted his eagerness, but also his temper. Complaints trickled in. Motorists claiming he'd pulled them over without cause, citizens describing aggressive pat-downs, a disproportionate number of Black and Latino residents in his reports. Each time the paperwork was reviewed, shrugged at, filed away. Complaints dissolved in bureaucracy. Kirkwood learned a dangerous lesson. The system shielded its own. With every escape, his arrogance grew. By the time he hit his late 30s, Kirkwood had cultivated a reputation, not for excellence but for being hard-nosed. In precinct chatter, that meant a cop who didn't hesitate to escalate, who viewed every encounter as a contest he had to win. He wore his complaints like invisible stripes, proof that he was doing the job right. He wasn't unique. Every department had a Kirkwood, a man who confused intimidation with respect, compliance with justice. But on that night, under the sodium glare of a suburban street lamp, his path intersected with Marcus Ellison's. Two men from different worlds, one who built authority on humility and discipline, the other who clung to authority as armor for his insecurity. Their collision wasn't random, it was inevitable. And as Kirkwood steered his prisoner toward the station, bragging under his breath, and Marcus sat silent with the poise of a man who had faced far worse, the stage was set for a confrontation that neither the precinct nor the Pentagon could ignore. The wall clock in the precinct ticked past 11, each second stretching thin. Marcus had been sitting in the holding cell for nearly an hour. He had spoken no more than a dozen sentences since arriving, each one calm, each one ignored. But now came the small mercy every detainee was owed. One phone call. The desk sergeant slid a handset across the counter, its cord twisted from years of use. "You get 5 minutes," he said flatly. Marcus took the receiver, the cuffs removed only for this purpose. He dialed a number from memory, a number he had repeated so often it lived in his bones. The line clicked. A young, brisk voice answered. "Aide-de-camp office, Lieutenant Harris speaking." "Harris, this is General Ellison," Marcus said, tone steady, carrying the weight of command. "I've been detained at the 14th Precinct. Contact Deputy Secretary Langley immediately. Inform him of my situation." The silence on the other end was sharp. Then Harris's voice rose, urgent. "Sir, detained?" "Where exactly?" Marcus repeated the address, then handed the phone back to the sergeant. "Thank you," he said quietly, and returned to the cell without protest. Harris, however, wasted no time. Within minutes, Pentagon switchboards lit up like a struck match. Phone trees activated. First the Deputy Secretary's office, then Army Provost Marshal Command, then the Chief of Staff. A 2-star general in custody wasn't a clerical hiccup. It was a crisis. Back at the precinct, the desk sergeant frowned as calls began to flood in. The first came from a Pentagon liaison, the second from Army Legal Services. By the third, his palms had grown clammy. He excused himself to the back office, phone pressed tight against his ear. When the police chief's personal cell buzzed on his nightstand, he sat up in bed, hair mussed, tie still draped over the chair from earlier. "What? Who?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "You're telling me one of my officers arrested Major General Marcus Ellison? Are you insane?" He was in his car within minutes, tires squealing out of his driveway. Meanwhile, in the cell, Marcus sat quietly, listening to the faint ringing and answering of phones throughout the building. The storm was arriving, as he knew it would. He leaned back against the wall, eyes closing briefly, recalling missions where patience had been the only shield. Kirkwood, pacing by the booking desk, wore a smirk. He nodded toward the cell. "Guy's learning a lesson. Rank doesn't mean you're untouchable." Another officer muttered. "You sure about that?" Kirkwood's brow furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" The younger cop shrugged, avoiding his gaze. "Nothing, just something feels off." Minutes later, the station doors swung open. A black SUV pulled up outside, its headlights slicing through the glass. 2 men in suits entered, Pentagon representatives. Their badges flashed with an authority that carried more weight than Kirkwood's entire career. The sergeant hurried forward, stammering. We were just about to release him." One of the Pentagon officials cut him off coldly. "Where is General Ellison?" In the cell, Marcus opened his eyes as the key turned. The door swung wide. "General," one of the men said, voice firm but respectful. "We're here to escort you." Marcus stood, his posture unchanged, as if the hour of humiliation hadn't dented him. He walked out slowly, the entire precinct watching in taut silence. Kirkwood's smirk faltered as the truth began to sink in. He turned to the chief, who had just stormed in, face red with fury. "What's going on here?" Kirkwood asked, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. The chief rounded on him. "You absolute fool. Do you have any idea who you put in cuffs? That man is a major general in the United States Army. 2 stars. Do you understand what you've done to this department?" The color drained from Kirkwood's face. For the first time that night, he had no answer. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't glare. He simply adjusted his shoulders and walked toward the door with the Pentagon officials, his silence louder than any accusation. And behind him, the walls of Kirkwood's illusion of power began to crack. The precinct was no longer the sleepy, fluorescent-lit hall it had been an hour earlier. It was a hive rattled by the sudden intrusion of power it wasn't prepared for. Phones rang incessantly. Officers huddled in corners, whispering. The tension was thick enough to press against the skin. When the front doors banged open, the police chief entered like a storm, shirt half-buttoned, tie loose, eyes burning. He scanned the room, his gaze locking on Kirkwood. "Where is he?" the chief barked. Kirkwood stepped forward, shoulders squared but voice uncertain. "In holding, chief. But, Pentagon guys came too." The chief cut him off, fury vibrating through his words. "Do you have any idea who you just arrested?" Kirkwood's throat bobbed. "Some guy who thought he was above the law." "That some guy," the chief thundered, jabbing a finger into the air, "is Major General Marcus Ellison. A decorated officer, 2 stars. He has more authority in his left hand than you'll ever see in your career." The room froze. A few younger officers exchanged wide-eyed glances. The whispers that had been bubbling all evening now surged. "It's true. He's a general, a real general." Kirkwood's smirk collapsed, but pride kept him standing tall. "Doesn't matter who he is." He resisted a voice from the back. One of the rookies piped up timidly. "Chief, sir, I was there." He didn't resist. He complied the whole time. Another officer added, "Yeah, I saw the dashcam feed." He handed over his ID. He asked why he was stopped, but that was it. The weight of their words crushed what little air was left in Kirkwood's defense. His jaw clenched, fists balling at his sides. The chief turned back to him, voice low now but more dangerous than shouting. "You humiliated one of the most respected generals in the army. And you did it on false pretenses. Do you understand the level of damage control we'll be doing for months because of you?" Meanwhile, Marcus stood near the exit, flanked by Pentagon officials. His cuffs had been removed, his composure unbroken. He declined offers of a seat, standing quietly, eyes scanning the room. He wasn't there to gloat. He wasn't there to retaliate. His silence was enough. Then came the final nail. A young officer rushed in from the side entrance, phone in hand. "Chief," he said breathlessly, "videos are already online. The stop, the arrest. It's spreading fast, hundreds of shares already. Local news picked it up. By morning..." He didn't have to finish. By morning, the world would know. The chief pinched the bridge of his nose. "God help us," he muttered. Kirkwood stepped forward, desperate now. "Chief, I was just doing my job. I had probable cause. The windows, the way he looked at me." "Shut your mouth," the chief snapped, voice slicing through the air. "Not another word." Internal affairs officers entered, clipboards in hand, faces grim. One gestured toward Kirkwood. "We'll need to take your statement." Now the swagger was gone. His steps toward the interview room sounded more like drags than strides. At that moment, the balance of power in the precinct had shifted entirely. Marcus, the man who had been treated like a criminal, now stood as the quiet center of gravity. Kirkwood, once inflated with arrogance, was shrinking under the weight of accountability. Reporters had already gathered outside, their cameras glowing like restless eyes in the night. The precinct doors rattled with the press of bodies demanding answers. Every officer inside knew the story was out of their hands. Marcus finally spoke, his voice calm but resonant. "Chief, I appreciate the correction of this matter. I don't hold grudges, but I expect accountability." The chief nodded, almost bowing. "Yes, sir. It will be handled." As Marcus walked out with the Pentagon officials, the flash of cameras lit up the night like fireworks. Kirkwood, sitting in a cramped interview room with internal affairs, could hear the muffled roar of questions outside. For the first time in his career, he understood. The badge no longer shielded him. By sunrise, the precinct had gone from local curiosity to national headline. Clips recorded on shaky phones showed Marcus being shoved against his SUV, cuffed despite calm compliance. His voice steady as he said, "Officer, there's no need for this." The words replayed across social media with captions like, "General humiliated in traffic stop," and "Racial profiling caught on camera." Morning shows picked it up before dawn. By 7 a.m., Marcus's name trended on every major platform. Some clips racked up hundreds of thousands of views. Memes and hashtags bloomed. Local reporters swarmed the precinct. By the time the mayor arrived at his office, the scandal was already shaping the national conversation. Inside the Pentagon, The mood was sharper, quieter, colder. In conference rooms normally reserved for international crises, senior staff huddled over laptops and tablets, watching the footage. They saw one of their own, one of the Army's most respected generals, treated like a criminal. And they understood the implications immediately. Deputy Secretary Langley called the first emergency meeting at 6:30 a.m. "We can't afford to let this be interpreted as us ignoring the treatment of a decorated officer," he said, voice tight with controlled anger. "General Ellison is not just any officer. He represents discipline, service, and dignity. What happened is an insult not just to him, but to the institution he serves." Across the table, the Provost Marshal General, the Army's top law enforcement officer, nodded. "We've already dispatched a team to liaise with the city. Internal Affairs is working overnight. But make no mistake, this isn't just about one arrest. This is about perception, public trust. If a two-star general can be treated like this, imagine what it says to every young soldier who wears the uniform." The Pentagon's press office drafted a statement within hours. It was unusually direct, leaving no room for interpretation. "Major General Marcus Ellison has served this nation with honor and distinction for over 3 decades. The treatment he endured during a traffic stop last night is unacceptable. We are working with civilian authorities to ensure accountability and justice. General Ellison remains in good standing and continues to serve his duties with distinction." The statement was released at 9 a.m. It was carried live on cable networks, dissected by anchors and analysts. At the City Hall, the mayor called a press conference. His tone was apologetic, rehearsed yet weighted with urgency. "On behalf of the city, I extend a personal apology to General Ellison and his family. The actions taken by one officer do not reflect the values we stand for. An investigation is underway, and we will pursue accountability to the fullest extent." Reporters peppered him with questions. Was this racial profiling? Why was the officer not supervised more closely? Has the department ignored complaints in the past? The mayor dodged some, answered others with vague reassurances. Back at the precinct, Kirkwood's suspension was immediate. His badge and weapon were confiscated in front of his peers. He tried to hold his head high as he handed them over, but his hands trembled. The officers who once laughed at his swagger now avoided his gaze. The rookies whispered in corners, eyes darting. Even his longtime partner, usually quick to back him up, stayed silent. Meanwhile, Marcus declined interviews. He issued only a short statement through the Pentagon. "I appreciate the support of colleagues and community alike. My uniform represents discipline and integrity. That is all I will say at this time." That single sentence carried more weight than 100 sound bites. It reminded the public that dignity was a choice, and that silence could be louder than outrage. By evening, cable news panels debated every angle. Commentators asked, "If this can happen to a major general, what happens daily to civilians without rank or influence?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable, undeniable. And for the first time in his career, Kirkwood's name appeared not on commendations or reports, but in bold letters across screens, a symbol of arrogance, now under the unforgiving lens of national scrutiny. For Officer Daniel Kirkwood, the days that followed felt like drowning in slow motion. At first, he clung to the belief that the storm would pass. He had weathered complaints before. Angry motorists, citizens filing bias reports, even 1 or 2 excessive force claims. Every time, the department had found a way to shield him. Supervisors buried paperwork, colleagues wrote reports that softened the truth, and Internal Affairs chalked it up to perception differences. He told himself this would be no different, but this time was different. The footage was undeniable. The sight of Marcus Ellison, cuffed, calm, and respectful, juxtaposed with Kirkwood's sneering commands and unnecessary force, played on endless loops across national television. The caption under his face wasn't "dedicated officer" anymore. It was "racist cop in viral arrest." At the precinct, his suspension was executed with ceremony designed to humiliate. His badge and gun were collected in silence. The chief himself handed him a sealed envelope, effective immediately, suspended without pay pending investigation. Kirkwood tried to argue, but his words fell flat. The same officers who once laughed at his bravado now refused to meet his eyes. Internal Affairs dug into his file. It wasn't a clean one. Complaints that had gathered dust suddenly looked like smoking guns. A black driver who claimed Kirkwood pulled him over 6 times in 1 year. A Latina nurse who said he accused her of drug possession during a simple speeding stop. A white teenager who alleged Kirkwood slammed him against a wall outside a convenience store for talking back. None had led to discipline. But now, in the glare of national scrutiny, they painted a devastating picture. Investigators visited his former partners, his supervisors, even civilians he'd once dismissed. Their testimonies, ignored before, now piled into a damning chorus. He escalates everything. He thinks he's above the rules. He looks for trouble where there isn't any. The police union, usually quick to defend its members, hesitated. In private, representatives admitted the case was toxic. "This one's too big," one union official told a reporter off the record. "He's radioactive. No one wants to touch it." 2 weeks later, the results of the investigation were made public. The report was blunt. Officer Daniel Kirkwood demonstrated a consistent pattern of misconduct, racial bias, and abuse of authority, culminating in the unlawful detention of Major General Marcus Ellison. His actions have undermined public trust and dishonored the department. That afternoon, Kirkwood was called into a small, wood-paneled hearing room. The chief sat at the head of the table, flanked by city officials and internal affairs. Kirkwood's lawyer tried to argue that the arrest had been a misunderstanding, that Kirkwood had acted in good faith, but the evidence was overwhelming. Dash cam, body cam, civilian video, and testimony from his own colleagues. When the verdict came, it was swift. "Officer Kirkwood, you are hereby terminated from the police department, effective immediately. You are barred from future law enforcement employment in this jurisdiction. Your record will reflect the findings of racial bias and misconduct." Kirkwood felt the words like hammer blows. He tried to stand tall, but his knees wavered. For a man who had built his entire identity on the authority of a badge, losing it was like losing his skin. Outside, reporters crowded the courthouse steps. His name was shouted in questions he refused to answer. Cameras caught his pale, tight-lipped face as he pushed through the throng. By evening, the footage was plastered across national news. His downfall was complete. He wasn't just a disgraced cop. He was the disgraced cop, the one who cuffed a general, the one who turned arrogance into a career-ending scandal. Meanwhile, Marcus returned quietly to his duties at the Pentagon. He refused interview requests, turning down networks eager for an exclusive. When asked by fellow officers about the incident, he simply replied, "My uniform represents discipline and integrity." That's all I will say. His restraint only magnified the contrast. One man had built his life on service. The other had built his on control. One walked back into the halls of leadership with dignity intact. The other walked out of a precinct stripped of the very thing that once gave him meaning. And across the country, people asked the same question. If a general needed national attention to see justice, what happens to those without stars on their shoulders?